If you're paying attention in the rhinoplasty world, you might have heard of something called a preservation rhinoplasty. What does that mean? A preservation rhinoplasty is a new way of thinking about how to approach making aesthetic changes to the nose. The funny thing about a preservation rhinoplasty is that it's actually a very old technique. So the original way rhinoplasty was described back in the early 1900s was actually a preservation approach. What does that mean? What that means is there's basically two ways to make changes to the nose. And I'm going to credit Mike Nyack in St. Louis with this analogy because it really is a beautiful analogy. But if you think about the Empire State Building, it's a very distinctive facade. You can appreciate it, you can recognize it from very far away, and it's very recognizable. If you're going to make changes to the Empire State Building, for example, if you think about the top of the building, the structural approach, or what most rhinoplasty surgeons in the United States have been doing for decades now, is where you take apart that facade, move the whole thing down, and then put it back together. When you do that, it's never going to look as pretty or as nice as when you originally did it. It will look good and it will look pretty close, but it won't look exactly the same. So contrast that to a preservation approach where if you want to preserve that beautiful facade, leave it alone. We do the changes further down in the middle of the building and then the whole thing comes down and we haven't touched that top part. That's a preservation approach. So there are different things you can preserve about the nose, and people like Aaron Cousins and Roland Daniel have written about this, where you're preserving the skin, or you're preserving the dorsum, you're preserving the alar cartilages. Leave that stuff for the rhinoplasty nerds. But basically, what we're trying to do is get away from taking apart and rebuilding, like a structural approach, versus just changing the things that we need to change and leaving the parts that aren't broken alone. That is the preservation approach, and that's how you do a preservation rhinoplasty. Now, anytime you introduce a new technique like that, it's going to take a few years to catch on because surgeons aren't going to suddenly switch what they're doing because what they're doing generally works quite well. So surgeons in Europe, for example, who have been doing this for a while, this is, I would say, much more common, say, in Europe than it is here in the United States, but more and more surgeons, myself included, are starting to do a lot more preservation rhinoplasty. It is a beautiful technique. It comes with its own problems and its own set of issues, but we're quickly learning how to mitigate those issues. And like any approach, nothing is perfect. Obviously, there's always complications, but I do think that there are certain benefits to the preservation approach that really make it interesting. So what I did for this particular patient, for example, the dorsum of the nose looks quite good. I didn't want to change it. What I wanted to do was just to get rid of the bump. So instead of taking this apart, bringing it down, putting it back together, we just preserve that and we're able to make the changes further down so that you can't see them and the bump just looks like it disappeared. And then I also made changes to the tip to bring the tip up and make it less droopy. All of this was done through a preservation approach, which is awesome, and that is a new way to do rhinoplasty. So let me know what questions you have. Leave them in the comments. I'm Dr. Peter Vila. I'm a facial plastic surgeon, and I will see you on the next video.